Hello there. I'm Elvis Akomone, and I'm taking this first segment of food and industrial microbiology. And as you already understand, we'll be teaching this course with Dr. Tibius, and he will be mostly physically present on campus in Bamenda. So today we're going to look at foodborne diseases. Foodborne diseases are infections that are usually arising as a result of the consumption of contaminated food or infected food, as we'll be seeing in some cases. And this food could be contaminated with a chemical, a natural toxin, or a pathogen like fungi, parasites, viruses, and bacteria. So there are so many different stages through which this contamination could occur. It could be at a level when you are growing the food, maybe vegetable food on the farm. So the water used for irrigation can be a cause of contamination. What you use for as manure can be a cause of fertilization, or generally the atmosphere, the raining atmosphere on the farm can be a cause of contamination. For animal products, the way the animals are raised could incur contamination, maybe the environment, the feeding areas, and also the natural habitat could, bring about contamination of these animals or infection of these animals. Contamination could also occur during harvesting. So what vessel do you use in harvesting? How is the environment, and how do you, handle the food after harvesting? So if for vegetables, some people may harvest and put and place on the ground at the farm, while others might properly handle it. In the course of doing that, contamination could ensure. For animals, for animals, during slaughtering, if you have been to an abattoir, you realize that slaughter conditions there are really horrible. And where they are being processed too, the washing of intestinal contents and other substances derived from the animals are really under very deplorable conditions. So a lot of contamination could occur at that level. During transportation to the market, from the farm to the market, could also bring about contamination of the food. I'm sure you must have seen how vegetables are transported around the cities there, in open vehicles and across Izakam waste container areas and dumping bins and stuffs. You could imagine how it is done there, and the prevailing atmosphere, and how contamination can easily occur. For animals who have realized that cattle in particular, if you move from Bamili to Bamenda on, I think, Thursday, you see how cattle are transported to the slaughter or the cattle market, and a lot is going wrong with the environment as they are being transported. While being purchased by the consumer, contamination could also occur. If you have been to the butchery, you see how meat is being sold, the atmosphere there, a lot is happening. Same with vegetables. If you go to the food market there in Bamenda, you realize that almost all vegetables are placed on the ground, and you pick from there and you move on with it. A lot of contamination is occurring at that level. While being prepared for consumption, now you are home with the food. How do you handle and process the food? Contamination could also occur at that level. So there are a lot of steps and a lot of precautions that are required to avoid foodborne infections or foodborne diseases. So I will be highlighting some of the foods that are involved in different diseases in the course of this lecture. But here you can see already how contamination could occur. There are two types of foodborne diseases, which are broadly uh, classified based on the etiologic agent. So the first one is what we call foodborne infection. A foodborne infection arises as a result of you consuming food that is contaminated or infected with a living organism. So when you consume food containing with living organisms like a bacteria, a virus, a parasite, or a fungi, and the organism multiplies within your gastrointestinal tract and spreads within you and invoke or provoke reactions from your immune system. you are going to have what we call a foodborne infection. On the other hand, you could consume but toxins released by microorganisms or naturally occurring toxins in food or chemicals found in our environment. When you consume food contaminated with these intoxicants, it is referred to as foodborne intoxication or food poisoning. So you have to get the difference very clearly so that we can be able to classify it well. So as I indicated, foodborne infection occurs because a pathogen, a living organism, is present in the food that you've consumed, and the organism multiplies within you and provokes a reaction from you. That is an infection. When you ingest organism, it could release toxins within you, it could move around within you and so on. And as I indicated, it provokes a reaction, and it usually results in symptoms like diarrhea and fever. We'll be highlighting again a good number of bacteria, fungi, and viruses plus parasites which are implicated here in the course of the lecture. But we'll just have to note that to distinguish a foodborne infection, the incubation period is usually longer. So it's more than 72 hours. So it takes between, more than a day. Let me put it like that. It takes more than a day for symptoms to start manifesting, but the average duration is 72 hours before you could see the infection really manifesting. And most of the times you are going to see fever. So whenever you have fever present, in addition with nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps, and diarrhea, you should automatically be suspecting foodborne infections. It is worth noting that foodborne infections are communicable. What do we mean here? They can be spread from one victim to the other. So if you are infected with a foodborne infection and you pass out stool carelessly, this stool can contaminate another object, and the object becomes what? Another source of infection. So you can pass or spread foodborne infections from person to person, and it could be very rapid. In some cases, like cholera, as you must have noticed. And a good number of factors account for this rapid spread of these infections. Inadequate cooking of a food. If you don't prepare the food well, the pathogen is still there and surviving. And when another person consumes that contaminated food, we are going to we should expect, in most cases, an infection. We have cross contamination of the food. Cross contamination could occur maybe as you are preparing the food or as the food is being served, is being contaminated, and then now we have these infections. Poor personal hygiene, especially of the food handlers. Even if you are not the one who prepared the food, but you bought the food from somebody who doesn't handle the food well, or I don't know, a lot could happen. I'm sure you must have been to these motor parks. You go to more and more park there in Bamenda, and you see the way chicken is sold. The chicken is sold by people you don't even know where when they last washed their hands, and even the vessels they're using to sell the food, and even the handling parcels is an eyesore, as you already be testifying. Bare hand contact of food, of course, if you don't practice proper hand hygiene and you contact food, your hands are always liable to contamination. So if you come in contact with food, we expect a contamination and subsequent foodborne infection. As I indicated earlier, the other classification is foodborne intoxication. Foodborne intoxication is due to the consumption of food contaminated with a toxin or a toxicant. So we're saying that there's no living organism present in the ingested food, or the cause of the symptoms are not as a result of a living organism present in the ingested food, but rather as a result of the presence of what? Either a biotoxicant found in tissues of certain plants and animals. So we have certain plants that naturally grow with biotoxicants. We'll be seeing some fungi in particular that grow with biotoxicants. So when these fungi grow and you consume them, you are going to go down with food intoxication or food poisoning. You will also consume food that has been contaminated with toxins. Toxins are metabolic products formed by microorganisms as they grow in food. So if you allow your rice, for instance, to stand overnight and you don't properly heat it, a good number of bacteria, including Staphylococcus and bacilli, are going to grow in the food. As they grow in the food, they will release toxins in the food. Now, the partial heating or the no heating at all that follows before your consumption or ingestion of the food, the toxins are going to survive all those conditions. So if you don't heat well, toxins are very, very stable under normal temperatures or mild temperature heating. So they will survive this heating. And when you consume the food, you are going to ingest the toxins released either by bacteria, fungi, or algae, and therefore the toxins that you've ingested are going to provoke an immune response, and you're going to go down with a disease. So in this case, the diseases or the symptoms are not as a result of a microorganism present, but as a result of products secreted by the microorganism before the food was ingested. Poisonous substances that could be intentionally or unintentionally added to food could also result in poisoning and foodborne infection. We'll be seeing some of these poisonous substances, including heavy metals or fertilizers that are used in cultivation. It is worth noting that while foodborne infection has a long incubation period, foodborne intoxication has a very short incubation period. So you start seeing signs and symptoms within minutes or hours after consuming the contaminated food. But there is general lack of a fever. So remember, in foodborne infection, we had fever, nausea, abdominal cramp, and stuff. But in foodborne intoxication, we are going to have nausea, we're going to have diarrhea, we're going to have vomiting, but we will not have fever. There's lack of fever among the symptoms that you could read here. A person with food poisoning may have a combination of symptoms. So they are not very specific, but there is general lack of fever. Why are they not specific? The causative agent will direct how the symptoms should progress. If it is a bacterial toxin, the symptoms will be different from a chemical, and the symptoms will be different from a biotoxicant. As indicated, we could have it within minutes, and these most of the times the symptoms will subside without you taking any treatment. So you don't necessarily need to take a treatment. However, you're expected to monitor the symptoms, and if they are going out of control, then you go for medical assistance. Now let me take you to the next slide, or my next presentation, which has examples of foodborne diseases, their causative agents, as well as the foodstuffs that are implicated in these diseases. So the first categorization is based on bacterial infections. So we are starting with foodborne infections. Remember, these are caused by the presence of a living organism in food. Presence of a living organism in food. So we start with bacterial diseases, and the first bacterial diseases that we'll look at is typhoid fever. Typhoid fever is caused by Salmonella typhi or Salmonella paratyphi, and it is foodstuffs that are usually implicated in typhoid fever include raw vegetables and fruit salads, pastries, etc. We also have shigellosis caused by Shigella species, especially Shigella dysentery, and foodstuffs involved include most foods that are handled with unhygienic processing. Cholera caused by Vibrio cholerae is another one, and fruits and vegetables contaminated with feces is usually the likely source of cholera. We also have non-typhoidal salmonellosis, which is different from the first categorization of typhoid fever, and these are caused by other Salmonella species like Salmonella typhimurium, Salmonella enteritidis, and others, and they are usually derived from consuming contaminated or infected eggs, poultry, and poultry products, among others. Bacillosis caused by brucellosis caused by Brucella species, especially Brucella melitensis, is really implicated or arising as a result of consuming milk and dairy products contaminated with the pathogen. Anthrax caused by Bacillus anthracis is another fatal condition and is implicated in consuming, is usually arising as a result of consumption of raw and undercooked meat and exactly, especially from chicken, dying oxen, cattle, sheep, etc. We also have bovine tuberculosis. Bovine tuberculosis is caused by Mycobacterium bovis. Remember, we also have Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which cause a typical tuberculosis that we are aware of. But bovine tuberculosis is acquired from cattle, caused by Mycobacterium bovis, and usually as a result of consumption of unpasteurized milk and other dairy products. E. coli infection caused by Escherichia coli species or serovars could come from consumption of beef, dairy products, or fresh products contaminated with raw produce, as well as feces. Listeriosis caused by Listeria monocytogenes arises as a result of consuming contaminated milk, cheese, ice cream, red meat, etc. We have viral diseases. Those are the common bacterial diseases that we have. We also have viral diseases. The first category is viral gastroenteritis. Viral gastroenteritis could be caused by rotaviruses, caliciviruses, especially the noroviruses and astroviruses, and they are acquired from consuming contaminated food that contain the virus. Viral hepatitis caused by hepatitis A and hepatitis E are also acquired from consuming raw shellfish polluted with sandwiches and other salads. Now, we will differentiate hepatitis B and C from hepatitis E and A. A and C, sorry, B and C are transmitted through sexual contacts, while hepatitis A and E are transmitted through consumption of contaminated raw shellfish, polluted water, sandwiches, salads, and desserts. We have the poliomyelitis caused by the poliovirus arising from consuming contaminated food and water with the virus. Rift Valley fever is caused by the Rift Valley fever virus, and any food contaminated with blood or aerosols from infected domestic animals are able to transmit the disease. Parasitic infections are also part of this group, beginning with teniasis caused by the two tenias that you are familiar with, Taenia solium and Taenia sedata, acquired from beef and pork, contaminated beef or infected beef and pork. Amoebiasis is caused by Entamoeba histolytica, and this is acquired from consuming any food contaminated with feces. Trichoniosis is caused by Trichinella spiralis, and if you consume insufficiently cooked pork and pork products, you are likely to go down with this disease. Ascariasis caused by Ascaris lumbricoides. Of course, you are very familiar with this. Food contaminated with soil or feces, you are likely to get down with ascariasis. Giardiasis caused by Giardia lamblia is another one. And if you also consume contaminated food with feces, you are likely going to go down with giardiasis. Toxoplasmosis caused by Toxoplasma gondii is present when you consume raw or undercooked meat and another food contaminated with cat feces. Cryptosporidiosis caused by Cryptosporidium parvum is also arising when you consume food contaminated with the eggs or the larvae of this parasite. Hydatid cyst or hydatid disease caused by Echinococcus gonolosus will also ensure if you consume food contaminated with duck feces. And Trias is caused by Botulium lactum, occurs if you consume raw or undercooked fish. Trichuriasis caused by Trichuris trichuria arises when you consume any food contaminated with soil. Could arise. It's not everybody that is susceptible. Fungal infections are also part of it. We have Aspergillus caused by Aspergillus species, Penicillium species, and the other yeast. And generally, when you consume cereals, grains, flour, and other cornmeal and cereal-derived products that are contaminated with this fungi, you are likely going to go down with fungal infections. Now, those are the categories based on pathogenic organisms. So we are done with foodborne infections. This second categorization is for foodborne intoxication, what you commonly call food poisoning. So remember we said this arises when you consume food contaminated with a biotoxin, a chemical, or a toxin released by an organism while growing. So the first ones are biotoxins or natural toxins, and these are naturally present in the food when the food grow. So this, and in this particular case, you don't necessarily need contamination. So as the food grows under normal circumstances, it produces these toxins. So most of the times, you either look for a means to get rid of these toxins, or you just avoid the food altogether. So neurolaterism is a disease caused when you consume food, especially guava, that contains beta oxalyl aminoalanine. So you're going to get food poisoning from consuming this guava. So we also have mushroom poisoning. We have phalloidine and alkaloids found in some poisonous mushrooms. I'm sure you must have heard of poisonous mushrooms. Not all mushroom species are edible. So when you consume such mushrooms like Amanita phalloides and Amanita muscaria, you are likely going to go down with food poisoning, and some could be really fatal. Bacterial toxins are also part of the toxin. So when these bacteria grow in food, they release or secrete these toxins. They are part of their metabolic products. When you heat the food, most of the time the heating could kill the bacteria, but not necessarily the toxins. So when you consume the food, the toxin is still present, and the toxin is going to give rise to an intoxication, poisoning. So an example is staphylococcal food poisoning, when you consume food containing enterotoxins of Staphylococcus aureus, and they're usually present in milk and other milk products like meat, sliced meat, poultry, legumes, and others. Preferential food poisoning arises when you consume food containing toxins of Clostridium preferens. Clostridium preferens is the most implicated species here, and inadequately heated or reheated meat and legumes are usually implicated. Botulism food poisoning, when you consume food containing the toxins of Clostridium botulinum, commonly found in canned foods and low acid vegetables, you are likely going to go down with this type of food poisoning. Escherichia coli food poisoning, when you consume food containing toxins, sugar toxins of enterohemorrhagic Escherichia coli strain 0157H7. It is a very, very potent toxin, and is commonly found in ground beef, dairy products, raw beef, and even hamburger and vegetables. Bacillus cereus food poisoning, when you consume food containing enterotoxins of Bacillus cereus, and these are commonly found in cereals, milk, dairy products, vegetables, etc. Egotism, when you consume food containing ergot, the ergot toxin found or produced by a group of fungi called the claviceps. The claviceps will usually release this ergot toxin, and the ergot toxins could be found in cereal grains, granules, peanuts, and so on. Chemical poisoning, as we indicated, that these chemicals could be part of the preservation process. They could naturally occur in the environment, like lead, mercury, cadmium, and fish will consume them in water. And then when you consume the fish, you are going to go down with the disease. Canned food that was preserved with these metals, the metals could leach gradually into these canned foods or from utensils. And when you consume the food, you go down with chemical food poisoning. Pesticides that are used on the farm as a result of getting rid of pests, or you could also have herbicides, you could have fungicides or other inorganic fertilizers. On an inorganic fertilizer, they could leave residues on crops, vegetables, and so on. And when you consume this food, you go down with chemical food poisoning. We also have additives that are introduced into food for preservation. So these additives, when you introduce them into food as a means of preservation, they could again be, either in excess or just naturally not tolerable by the system, and they could cause you poisoning. We also have situations where you intentionally include something in food to kill somebody. I'm sure you must have watched that on movies, or maybe you must have known somebody who did that around your neighborhood. So that is also referred to as food poisoning. So whenever we talk of food poisoning, don't only think about when you introduce chemicals or so-called poison into food to harm somebody. They could also come through natural causes. They could come through infections. They could come through or preservative methods. So I will be ending the recording now and then open the room for discussion.